Are you happy with your energy bills? Do you like the uncertainty of how much your next fuel purchase is going to cost? Are you a gardener or farmer concerned about the past 4 months above average rainfall and an inability to get seeds planted in the ground? Is it possible to mitigate against the problems climate change will bring, or has that boat already sailed? Energy and Sustainability Centre directors Ralph Peake and Adrian Cowin think they have some of the answers, and they share their thoughts on today's perspective. Ralph Peake is one of the movers and shakers behind the Energy and Sustainability Centre.
I've been a director of the Energy and Sustainability Centre for about 3 years now, and been working on trying to bring some clarity to the public here on the Isle of Man for how they can benefit from renewable energy and how we can do our bit to reduce our CO2 output here on the Isle of Man.
And you have a new director who sat alongside you, Adrian Cowin. Why did you feel possessed to join Ralph on his mission?
Well, not so much possessed, Phil, but I was interested in the work I'd seen ESC doing already on the Isle of Man, the good work, and had some limited contact already with Ralph, but more so with Dr. Dave Quirk as a fellow scientist, and then I'd provided some data to help ESC in my previous role as Senior Met Officer, Isle of Man climate data. Ralph then approached me shortly after I had retired from my 40 years of good service at Ronaldsway, and we had a discussion about perhaps my skill set, experience and knowledge could add to the already quality set of persons working for ESC. And I said, yes, I've got some time on my hands now, and I'd be interested in looking at adding to the value of the work that's being done at ESC.
Okay, and for those who don't know, Ralph, maybe you could explain a little bit about what the organisation is, and how do you fund your activities, things like this?
Yeah, so we've got the funding is by financial partners, but the directors are all volunteers, so we don't take any wage for this, any salary at all. So what we do then is use that money from local companies and actually then, as I say, promote what is good practice in either renewable energy or home insulation, or ways that people and the country and the government can reduce their CO2 output. That's really the drive of this, really, is trying to get to that sustainable path for the island. We really do believe, as Professor James Curran pointed out quite clearly, that the Isle of Man has got an abundance of natural resources here. We all know how windy it is. We do have good, long, sunny hours in the winter as well as in the summer. And we do think that with that abundance of natural resources, it really would be foolish, really, to ignore that and not turn that into clean, green, renewable energy.
And just finishing off that point in relation to the finance, are any of your backers, are they naturally sort of green organisations, or what sort of organisations support you?
Well, currently we've got KPMG. They're a local branch of a worldwide financial accountancy organisation. We've got Capital International, which does hold the latest banking licence here on the Isle of Man. We've got the Peel Group, which people know that they own Liverpool Airport and a number of other large installations, very strong in the renewable sector. And we've got Zurich International. So we're very pleased to have those. We've also got a small company with Best Energy. So it's a group of companies which are very committed to the island having a green, renewable energy future. And so we're just trying to sort of bring all that together. We're working with the Isle of Man Newspapers Group, and we've got a page now which you'll be able to find on the Isle of Man Today page. And that really does have some good information, and it then sort of promotes the work that we're doing. Adrian and I will be holding a series of events this summer here on the island, and it leads up to building on our series of TV programme we had last November with Clive Myrie. That turned out to be very good, and so we're building on that with a series of events this summer.
Well, perhaps then we understand now a little bit about the organisation. It would be useful perhaps to hear from Adi as to the why. Why do we need to be bothered with any of this? I mean, the obvious argument that's put against the Isle of Man taking any action is that any action we could take is so minimal in terms of reversing the carbon problem that we have globally. Why would we even bother?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I hear that. Strangely enough, I hear that quite a lot, Phil. And small nations are still part of the global problem. As such, yes, there are big nations that are greenhouse gas producers on a mega scale, and the Isle of Man is only a very, very small percentage of that sort of scale. But all the same, we're in a fortunate position that although we are only producing a small carbon footprint on the Isle of Man, there's still absolutely no reason, given our resources and economy and businesses, that we shouldn't or make an effort, a reasonable effort, to reduce our carbon footprint. And by that, the easy one is stop burning fossil fuels when there are very good alternatives already available, mature technologies such as wind turbines, solar. There are emerging technologies that are coming over the next few decades, but we have already on our doorstep natural resources available to make use of, and this has been identified now for some time by various studies, including on the Isle of Man, and recommendations. And the Isle of Man government, I'm pleased to see, is taking those positive steps towards a more sustainable and secure future. And even just recently, the island plan has been updated, and one of the key elements that has been reaffirmed is the steps to be taken in the energy infrastructure and a source of energy to make our future have less carbon footprint. But I think it's bigger than that. I look forward to the fact that the Isle of Man can have energy security, and we could also have predictability, which is important to all on the Isle of Man, but especially attracting new residents, new businesses, and businesses that are here to stay. If you've got energy security and stability, you've got predictability of pricing structure as well.
One of the surprising things, certainly to me as someone who's always tried to live a very sustainable life, is that there doesn't seem to be much focus on energy waste, and in the same as in the food sector. Something like a third of the food that's produced around the world is wasted, and vast amounts of energy is wasted on the Isle of Man, heating homes, for example. Why do you suppose? I mean, maybe Ralph, as a former politician, maybe you'd be better placed to answer this. I don't know, but why do you suppose the amount of energy that we waste is not considered? Better insulation of our homes, things like this.
Well, I think we've probably been attracted to a consumer-led economy, but I think what the opportunity we've got now is actually to take personal responsibility, and that will deliver personal benefits. It really will. When you actually start understanding the savings you can make in your expenses, it really is. Every year it builds up, and we as a charity we're working on some case studies, people's homes in the Isle of Man, to try and get a selection where we can give people the facts around saving energy in your home. And we've carried out these tests, and it really boils around an air tightness test, really, so to try and eliminate those drafts in your home. Because if you look at your well-decorated home, you can't really believe how many drafts there are, and it's just too easy to think, oh well, that's okay, there's no need to do that, my house is all right, and the bills are high and someone else needs to sort this out for me. But we found that by using air tightness equipment, that actually then pressurises the house, and you can then actually see where where the drafts actually either escape with use of a fog equipment, or you can then suck the air out and actually feel the drafts coming in. So there's two ways of doing that, but that really does then highlight it, and the difference it makes if you then spend a day, like a tradesman would spend a day, actually filling those gaps and cracks in. The difference on that day's costings will actually save that every year in the future. And that's really what it's about. It's trying to get something measured. I'm a great believer in once you turn your attention to something and actually measure it, you can then understand how much energy is being used, and you can then do something about it. If you don't measure something, there's no real impetus or drive or focus to actually carry out any of this work, and it's too easy to gloss over it. So I think there's not only is the cost benefit, we can then also feel, Adrian can talk about this in more detail, but our climate here on the Isle of Man, this is going to affect us going forward. So the more we can do here on the island will benefit our island future. That's the second thing. So it's about taking responsibility really for our costs and our island's climate future.
Because we do, I mean, we spend tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, on fossil fuels every year. And, even from a basic economic point of view, all that money leaves the island and we never see it again. Far better if you put some draft excluder up and fill in a few gaps, and significantly reduce your energy bills. That has to be a good thing generally for the Manx economy.
It's going to be great, isn't it? Not only for your own personal pocket, but as you say, it's for our economy. Why all this money is going off the island? It'd be much better spent here, actually, on other things, on energy creation here on the island. And I do believe there's an awful lot of people who want to do the right thing. They want to either, if they can afford it, they do want to put solar on their house. They do want to put battery storage in now. So it's really getting that evidence to them so they can make that informed decision. And that's what we're trying to do here at Energy and Sustainability Centre.
Well, perhaps it would certainly be remiss of me having a scientist in the studio, particularly a meteorologist in the studio, if we didn't investigate a little bit further some of the claims and counterclaims in relation to what's actually happening to global climates and indeed the climate in the Isle of Man. So maybe, Adi, if you could tell us what has changed. I mean, how long were you at the Met Office in the Isle of Man?
Yes, so a total of 40 years.
So that's a reasonable length of time to be able to say, okay, 40 years ago it was this, now it's that. Yes. So there's an obvious and measured change.
Yes, Phil, there is. I could gather from experience that there was a change over the decades that I was working in meteorology. For example, there was a sense of myself and colleagues were having to issue more frequent and severe weather warnings for the likes of winter rainfall. I was attending more briefings on the other side of the coin, more briefings about the risk of summertime droughts. And those things brought to my mind that let's look at the data a little bit more, and not just for the 40 years that I was there, but we looked back at the data sets we had for the Isle of Man. We're at recognised, correctly calibrated centres for measuring the atmosphere, temperature, rainfall and the wind. And at Ronaldsway, that means our records from 1947. But we had a better data set than that, indeed one of the best data sets in the British Isles in Douglas from 1870. It's amazing how many things were set up in the Isle of Man first, back in that period. So we had a long-term record to refer to and compare recent decades with the previous 100 years in the case of Douglas. And in the case of Ronaldsway, the previous the most current 30 years with the previous 45 years or so. And the statistics, lo and behold, showed us that, like the rest of the planet, the Isle of Man and the British Isles are warming up. But I drilled down a bit more than that, and I was a bit concerned about, let's on the ground, besides the 1 to 1.5 degrees of warming above pre-industrial times, which is well established now as a fact, what was the impact of that on the Isle of Man besides those measured changes? And the impact that I found was the rainfall distribution change. And we sort of knew this already, I think, but look at the data, prove the point. And in the last 30 years, we've seen an increase in rainfall on the Isle of Man in the autumn and early winter months. So October, November, December, we are now seeing more wet days in the last 3 decades on average than what we did in the 45 years before that. And not only more wet days, 10% more rainfall in October, November and December. And of course, those months are already wet months on the Isle of Man, as any farmer and builder will tell you about. So we're actually getting more rainfall at a time of year when we don't want any more rainfall. And in fact, there's also a slight increase in springtime rainfall as well. But the biggest one was that 10% increase in autumn, early winter. And that was the clear evidence to me on the Isle of Man at a local level. There's a measurable impact already.
And I suppose scientists don't like to speculate, do they? But they can reasonably, well, I suppose you can now because you're retired, reasonably give some kind of assessment as to why there may be more rainfall at certain times of year than perhaps there was previously. What would be the reasons for that?
Okay, well, it's mainly the global drivers, and by that I mean not only the atmosphere but the oceans, and in our case in particular the Atlantic Ocean, which, lo and behold, is also warming as well as the atmosphere. It takes longer for the oceans to warm up, as any physicist or most people know. It takes longer to warm up a body of water, a kettle, a swimming pool, than it does to heat up the air. But the Atlantic Ocean in particular, and most oceans of the planet, have become warmer. The ocean heat content, by the way, is the interface that feeds the atmosphere. A warmer ocean into a warmer atmosphere, as most school children know from their basic science and physics, carries more moisture. More moisture into the atmosphere equals more cloud, and that cloud has that moisture content that can produce more rainfall. So that's one element, but where that rainfall falls is another one, and the driver there is what's happening in the upper atmosphere, and that is becoming more energetic as well. Jet streams that control and steer weather systems are more powerful in recent decades, and they drive the depressions across the North Atlantic that produce the frontal systems, that produce the rain. And those rain bands, those weather fronts, have now got more rainfall in them because it's in a warmer, moister atmosphere. So all these things are interconnected. We call it the ocean-atmosphere interface. So that's the driver, and that's what's more coming our way. To the British Isles, lo and behold, the Isle of Man sits in the middle of the British Isles. We're measuring increased rainfall at that time of year. And these things tend to look to indicate by climate predictions, with some further evidence coming to light every year, that we'll see this happen more frequently and more severely in this part of the planet.
You're listening to Perspective with Energy and Sustainability Centre Directors Ralph Peake and Adrian Cowin. While agricultural production on the Isle of Man is generally, well, I don't know, maybe this is unfair to say, but it doesn't appear to be considered particularly important by the government or indeed the people of the island. Agricultural production across those parts of the world that can produce food, that's a really big and important issue. And are we seeing an impact on food production now, or is that too early to?
I feel, as ever, my farming friends do tend to moan about the weather, and I think they're having impacts from the wetter weather spells. Difficult to get onto the land to start with, and then cultivate their growth and successful crops with good yields. And wet, muddy, soggy ground is not a good start. But conversely, some of the summertime dry spells, as ever, seem to come along at the wrong moment in terms of the crop cycles. And so again, that has an impact on crop yields, especially if the crop, the seeds have had to be delayed before they could successfully be put into the field. And then just when things are going good, you enter a drought period and your growth stops, which ultimately affects your yield, which it's a supply thing. You've got less supply, and what you have got available, the price goes up. And that's been seen not only on the Isle of Man and around the British Isles, but also in Europe. and go a bit further south in Europe, where the droughts are also lasting longer in recent decades in association with heat waves. The price in Europe for crops, or the failure of crops, all those things conspire against food production, agriculture generally. So I think that's an impact of climate change that is not always highlighted, and it should be, because production of food, availability of food, the cost of food, it's really part of the big problem.
Okay, so we seem to have reasonable amounts of evidence and data that would suggest these changes are happening. There are lots of people still in the world who don't see a link between carbon emissions and climate change. Admittedly, not that many of those people are scientists, but I would say there's quite a lot of people on the Isle of Man who still don't connect climate change, the changes in the atmosphere, with carbon emissions. A number of people suggest that there's things to do with phases of the sun and different solar activity, things like this, are probably as relevant to this discussion as increase in carbon emissions. How would you respond to that?
Yep, I totally accept that there's natural changes, which is essentially what you're referring to. Natural changes on a planetary and basis. You can measure those as well, and they have been documented and measured, and some of those are linked to lunar cycles, others to solar cycles, and there are other periods of natural change in our atmosphere. One of the most documented one is volcanic activity, and that produces temporary net cooling in one of the hemispheres. An example of that was the volcanic eruptions in Iceland in 2010. But the other drivers that we need to be concerned about, there is this, I suppose, focus on carbon and fossil fuels, and too right, because it's mankind across the planet who's using and burning too much fossil fuels. But there's actually the other natural greenhouse gases that are being released because we're living in a planet with a warmer atmosphere and warmer oceans. And the elephant in the room in that one, in my respects, for greenhouse gases, and it's a powerful greenhouse gas, is methane. Natural methane, is being released from the bottom of oceans and lakes, and also being released from frozen tundra that is now defrosting because of our warming planet. So that natural methane is being released. It's a powerful greenhouse gas, and that's one of the big players that's causing problems in our global warming. And it's the focus on man-made carbon is perhaps maybe an over-focus. I accept that, and I totally do accept that there are other natural phenomena going on that does alter our climate as blips on a slower scale. And there's even a longer range cycle, the Milankovitch cycle, solar cycle, that people get tied up with. But if you look at the shorter range and medium range data, or the local data as well, is driven by the impact of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere.
I remember about 12 years ago, there were various protests held on the Isle of Man, expressing concern about us reaching 350 parts per million for, was it carbon dioxide?
It was CO2,
yeah.
Yes.
And where are we at now?
Right, the data sets from international monitoring sites is of the order of 423 parts per million. Anyway, yeah, we've breached those values that there was concern about previously. That we thought, if we ever breach more than this 350, we're in trouble. If we ever breach 400 parts, we're in trouble. And here we are now. In the last few years, we've breached 420. We're sat at 423.
And it's well, to me anyway, it's quite alarming to note that in what appears to be just over a decade, we've increased almost by a third the amount of carbon as a part per million measure. That's that's quite alarming to note that has changed in that short period of time.
Yeah, it is indeed. And of course, the identified drivers for that, an increasing population of the planet, but a more industrial planet, especially the developing industrial countries we're talking about there from the mid-1980s in particular, where most of these measured changes have seen the rapid increase, a growing rate of increase, never seen before, and that's because of the industrialisation and fossil fuel burning production of power stations in, I'm pointing fingers here, China, India, parts of Europe, but also our friends in America. Coal-fired powered stations, some oil and gas, but a lot of coal-fired power stations. And that's the increase of CO2. A smaller percentage is an increase in air travel. Air travel is not a big bad boy for CO2 after all, by the way. It is power stations, fossil fuel burning power stations is the bad boy. But the other greenhouse gases from this industrialisation is nitrous oxide. And the other one in industry is coolants. Powerful greenhouse gases. The bad boy there that's been now stopped by international agreements was CFC, the coolant, the refrigerant. So there's all those man-made products as well as the increase in CO2.
And of course the encouraging thing about CFCs is that there was a global move to get rid of them, and things like the hole in the ozone layer was addressed. Do we have the same level of encouragement, do you think, in relation to where we're going with carbon emissions?
I feel we do. The IPCC reports that are updated annually, and of course we have the Conference of Parties, the COPs, that occur. Many international agreements come out from that. Just about every government on the planet now partakes in those discussions and agreements. But
agreements are surely only worth the paper they're written on if actions follow.
Correct. So my opinion that the agreements are great, but equally I am equally cynical about actions, or the lack of action, unfortunately, by a lot of countries. Strangely enough, some of the poorer countries are making changes and actions quicker than the rich countries. The rich countries are saying, well, we'll make those changes, but give us another 20 years. Well, to be honest, the planet hasn't got another 20 years to start making those changes. It's almost now too little too late. But fast action's now required by all countries, especially the big polluters. And we come back to that idea, the big polluters must lead the way, because some small countries are already showing the way that they can adjust to stop burning fossil fuels. We've gone to renewables. Our Scandinavian friends, the big countries and the small countries in Scandinavia, are ahead of the game. They've done that already.
One of the big Middle Eastern, I forget which country it was, oil and gas companies, as recently the CEO has been quoted as saying that actually that this is causing far too much economic damage around the world, and we can't afford to do this, and actually the damage to the economy is far greater than the damage to the environment, so we've got to keep burning gas and oil. Is there any merit in that argument?
Well, that's the point, Phil. It's mixed messages coming out. Excuse me. It's mixed messages coming out. In the 1980s, you refer to the CFC, there was almost a unified message, really. I remember things on TV. It came into soap operas on TV, the message around CFCs and the ozone layer, and people got behind it. That hasn't happened this time. I think it will. It'll have to for us to make a change. But that hasn't happened, and mixed messages from all governments doesn't help. You got, subsidies on one hand, schemes trying to get you to encourage you to spend your own money on improving your house, reducing your fossil fuel dependency. And then on the other hand, releasing licenses for exploration. it's mixed messages, and you can see why the public are confused and don't know where to put their own money in the right area. That's what we're trying to bring some clarity to this situation, and by the public understanding clearer, reducing their fear, then people will then get behind it and have the messaging clearer.
But you can perhaps understand people who perhaps are a little bit cynical about this, because of course there are lots of mixed messages, and particularly I think social media has a lot to blame for this, in that anyone can post their opinions on social media these days. So there will be many people in the Isle of Man who think a little bit sceptically about, towards the whole climate change thing. Then they see the likes of the Kroger exploration for gas off the northeast coast of the island. They hear talk of potentially as much as £4 or £5 billion worth of additional income for the government. It's hard to resist those sorts of arguments when we're struggling to, the Isle of Man government seems to be struggling to provide the services that many people in the Isle of Man want to receive.
Right, so the clear message around that is what the cost would be for fossil fuels in the future and what the costs of energy will be for renewable energy. And so once the public can see what the costs will be based on proper modelling by scientific friends and academics, we can then get a model that people can then see and understand. That's the messaging we need to have. Clear messaging of what it will cost for a kilowatt hour of energy from fossil fuels and what it will cost from renewable energy. When people can see that, that's returning to what I said, it affects people in their own budgets, what that will cost. And if you're a business looking to set up, what better place would there be in the world than a place that had 100% renewable energy at a fixed price? Imagine if we were guaranteeing a price for 5 years at 16 pence a kilowatt hour, like we used to have in 2019. We would sign up for that, because it's been hectic, hasn't it, over the last few years? Prices have been going up and down, promises of it coming down and then going up. That inconsistency is what businesses do not want and homeowners do not want. They want consistency, affordable energy, and that's what renewable energy generated here on the Isle of Man will deliver.
Is part of the problem here that there are conversations that politicians in particular, and I'm not blaming politicians here, because politicians are elected to a certain extent to represent what the public feel, but also to try and provide some leadership. But Adi, you alluded to this earlier. Part of the problem is that over our lifetime, the population of the world has it doubled during that time? It's certainly massive increase, and it's expected to increase by a further 25% by 2050. No politician worth their salt is going to stand up, apart from maybe in China, and say, actually, we've got far too many people and we need fewer.
Well, I think the population is going to reduce in the future, because it's quite clear in China particularly, they've had a one-child policy for a number of years now. Their problem is going to be too few people. So there's many countries. Italy have got one of the lowest rates of increase. In fact, their population is reducing. So there are many countries with populations about to reduce. That is not good for economy. That's not good for growth. So when you sort of ask politicians what they should be supporting, it's about trying to get growth, but sustainable growth, not built on fossil fuels, not built on continuing growing of populations.
It's worse than that with the population one, of course. Another impact of climate change across certain parts of the planet that become even hotter and drier is life in those parts of the planet will be difficult. That tends to lead to migration of population, and I'm talking about mass migration here. Millions and millions of people displaced because of the impacts of climate change. They can't grow enough food where they are because of droughts and heat waves, or it's become too dangerous because of wildfires. And there's another part of the planet where there'll be increased flooding. Bangladesh is an example. Millions of people migrating through northwards in that case. So governments have got to recognise those migrating populations will add a burden and a strain on their systems and infrastructure. which will also becoming an increasing strain and stress because of climate change impacts. So I think governments have to take a longer view rather than the short-term view about it doesn't really affect us and we're only looking after ourselves. Global impacts will come your way, one way or the other, beyond the short term. And that means an investment, a wise and reasonable investment in a complete transition from fossil fuels to renewables. You could do a quick fix in the transition, but it's wasting time and money. Bill Gates himself has written about this and identified it would be a waste of time and money, and he's got plenty of it, and he doesn't want to waste any of it in the companies he invests in. That you must invest in the correct pathway from day one, rather than just dabble slightly for 10 years. If you lose 10 years, you're going to be behind the curve to beat the change going forward. And coastal communities are at risk, and the Isle of Man is one of those. From the other aspect of climate change that we haven't mentioned, but we should mention, rising sea levels. There's another one there. So to have a sustainable and secure future based on renewable energy that you can generate locally, store locally, and if you have an excess of it, whoopie-doo, you can sell that because the rest of the world nearby may want to buy your energy because you've got some surplus of that. So that there's a whole range of opportunities here at a local, national level.
Those opportunities, though, only exist when the sun shines and the wind blows. So how do you solve that particular problem? Because battery solutions seem to cause significant environmental damage in terms of mining various rare earth metals and things like this. How do we solve this? Because there's no point in having a really fantastic wind farm and lots of really good solar panels that only work in certain climatic conditions.
Energy storage, that's the key. I mean, we've been using energy storage throughout the fossil fuel era. That's what fossil fuels are. It's just energy stored in the fossil fuel, and you then release it when you turn on your gas boiler or start your engine in your car. You're just releasing that energy and turning it into propulsion inefficiently, because you only get about 30% out of the energy you burn. But that storage is the key, absolutely. And the Isle of Man has got the topography to have pumped hydro storage, but battery storage is a solution as well. Batteries are getting cleaner. They're removing the need for cobalt and other harmful materials in those. But we must remember the fossil fuel industry uses many millions of tons of cobalt in their processes. So it's not as though the fossil fuel industry is clean and we're moving from a clean resource to a battery that's got some harmful materials in. That's not a correct paradigm to look at this in. And when you look for images, I think infrastructure is one of the things. And if you look at images that will convey that message of infrastructure loss, it's the loss of the bridge in Laxey. I mean, Adrian recently spoke about the rise in sea levels and the flooding. That bridge in Laxey stood for hundreds of years, and it was lost because of, I think, the scouring away of the torrential floods in the river. It just weakened it, and the bus then fell in. And what an image we've got in our minds of that department bus in the river with the collapsed bridge around it. That's the problem we're going to have on the island. It's loss of infrastructure is the biggest thing. And infrastructure means items of large equipment, homes, energy generation that's in an area that is very likely to be flooded. And our own power station in Douglas is right in the centre of an area that's going to be flooded. Now, you can take precautions around that, but that's costly as well. So what would be much better would be to try and divert our precious money into resources that will give us renewable energy.
So you mentioned there, it's sort of glossed over, but the topography of the Isle of Man would be good for potentially, effectively, I think what you're suggesting is we pump water up to the top of a hill and then allow it to run down when the the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. I mean, we've already got a lot of people on the Isle of Man raising concerns at what they would describe as the despolation of the countryside by having these massive big wind turbines on tops of hills. You're also then suggesting that we need to flood certain areas of the island and allow this kind of hydro storage thing to operate too. And surely that's going to cost a substantial amount of money, substantially more than just building the wind farm.
Well, yes, it may well cost more. It doesn't have to be above ground, it could be underground. But that will be in the cost of providing the energy. This is what the government doesn't have to do this. Obviously, the private sector can do this. That's where the real money is to produce these large infrastructure and technically challenging infrastructure projects. But you can deliver that within the cost of the energy. Now, we have modelled this, ESC has modelled this last year, and even delivering energy storage, renewable energy infrastructure, you could still come out with a price of 16 pence per kilowatt hour, and that will be profit for a private company to do that. So if you wait for government to do it, as much as we'd like government doing things on the Isle of Man, it doesn't have to do everything. Work in partnership together would be the way forward. Bring in that private investment, set up an agreement that will deliver the energy that's affordable to the Manx public for a cost that private companies can still have a return on. That would be the solution, in my opinion.
And you mentioned there that it doesn't have to be government. But if you talk to any member of Tynwald, they all seem to be trotting out exactly the same line, which is actually the only people that can deliver this for the Isle of Man, or the only organisation that can deliver this, is the MUA, and that in fact it would be wrong to put in the hands of private companies our energy security. Are they wrong?
No, I think the MUA will deliver the energy. I think that really makes sense. We know and trust the MUA. It's connected to every home on the Isle of Man now. Why would you stop that? I totally agree with that. I'm talking about the infrastructure to generate. So it's about a public-private partnership. That will be the quickest way to deliver that.
And I suppose I'm talking about the same thing, in terms of the targets that Adrian, you referred to earlier on in the government plan. These are all to be delivered by the MUA. There is no private sector involvement in energy generation as far as the government plan seems to go.
Yes, you're correct. That is the current position.
But you're arguing that actually it would be delivered quicker.
To deliver it quicker, yes. Yes,
okay.
That would be the way to do it. That's how it's done around the world. Why not follow that model, have that delivered as quick as we can? Adrian's explained how urgent this is now, how quickly the parts per million of carbon has increased since man has been burning fossil fuels. That's a tremendous increase. Millions of years it was between that 300 to 200 parts per million, and it's only since 1950 that it's shot up to a now record 423. It's incredible. So how urgent is this? And that's the message we have to do. We have to try and help people understand that this is urgent. It is so important, but it's also urgent as well. And there is a way through that together. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be fear-filled. It can be a good outcome for people of the Isle of Man. So
why do you suppose then that Tynwald members appear to be so eager to keep this as a public enterprise, citing that other parts of the world where private sector companies have been in charge of energy production, things have gone badly wrong, but not really coming up with convincing reasons? Why do you think that Tynwald is so adamant that this must be a public enterprise and not involve the private sector at all?
Phil, you and I have sat through many briefings to political members, and a briefing will brief on what's known at that time, but that is not the whole picture of the world. So what we're really trying to do is bring those parties together, a sensible conversation, improve the understanding on both sides, and then have a different outlook, have a different paradigm for the Isle of Man. That's what it's about. I'm not saying it's wrong now. I'm just saying there is a better way. We know there is a better way around the world in certain areas, and some of those will be right for the Isle of Man.
Well, I know what the answer Ralph is going to give to this question, because he's a very positive person. But Adi, you're a scientist and you've been a civil servant, so perhaps, particularly with the latter hat on, you've known your share of cynicism over the years. Do you have optimism that good solutions are going to be found, that the Manx public are going to be convinced and are going to come wholeheartedly on board with solutions for the Isle of Man in particular, but maybe also in terms of a more general global picture? How optimistic are you?
Growing optimism, I'd put it as, Phil, as I think the population becomes more informed to make an opinion known to their elected representatives, and if that growing opinion of change comes to bear in manifestos, and politicians who are brave enough to look beyond the next election, instead of that short-term view of what am I doing that is acceptable and seem to be reasonable and may get me re-elected next time round, if they look at the longer view of 20 years and beyond, what's best for the people I represent, the Isle of Man, I think we're coming gradually round to that sort of opinion, even on the Isle of Man. And there are models to look at elsewhere where this has been a success story between governments working with energy producers. Those companies have rolled out successful programs of energy production and energy storage around the planet now, and we can buy into that experience and expertise and knowledge. And there are some examples of small islands and Scandinavian countries in particular that have now shown that you can have that partnership, working with the private sector, the government and the people to have a more sustainable and secure future. And indeed, some of those schemes are already so successful, they've got an energy surplus. They have stored some of their energy in batteries. They've moved now towards pumped hydro schemes, and they're releasing some of that energy via interconnectors the other way. They're selling some of that energy to other European countries. And that's a very secure and powerful position to be in, selling something you've invested in rather than paying an increasing price to buy in from somewhere else. So you've got to have that longer vision to be more secure, I feel, even on the Isle of Man.
And Ralph, then, if you were drafting a manifesto either for yourself or someone else for the forthcoming election in 2026, what are the things that you would be putting in there to say, okay, if you vote for these policies, if you vote for a greening of the Manx economy, a move away from reliance on fossil fuels, what are the benefits that the Manx voters would get from this?
Yeah, to me, the answers are in that Professor James Curran's report, and it was all laid out quite clearly there. The benefits will be we'll have a more stable cost of energy here in the Isle of Man that is affordable and is from our natural resources. That will give us security of energy on the island. We're not then paying the wholesale price of energy, which is based around gas, even if you're buying it from the UK and it is generated from renewable energy. It's still in a wholesale market. If we have the energy created here on the Isle of Man, we've then got the opportunity to use that at a cost that's agreed and then store it for when the wind is not blowing and the sun's not shining, and then the surplus can be exported when the price is high, and we can then benefit from that. That, to me, will create not only a secure future for our island people, but an opportunity for businesses, international businesses, to stay here firstly and then attract new business. And that's where the growth will be. Sustainable island with a growing future.
That was Energy and Sustainability Centre Directors Ralph Peake and Adrian Cowin. So are you convinced? Have we overcooked the planet? Whether you accept man-made climate change or not, surely cheaper, cleaner energy must be a good thing. Or do you think it's just an unnecessary drop of Manx Green Wash in a mighty, overheated global ocean? I'm Phil Gorn, Gonna Maius and Geishachrom. Thanks for listening.